Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we'll be looking at a very important topic under the microeconomic theory, and the topic is partial equilibrium. In our previous video, we looked at the concept of equilibrium, we discussed what equilibrium is all about, the key assumptions, and represented it graphically. So in this video, we're going to be looking at one out of the two types of equilibrium and solving a question pertaining to it. In economics, we have two types of equilibrium, which are the partial equilibrium and the general equilibrium. But for the purpose of this video, we will only be looking at partial equilibrium. Partial equilibrium is associated with Alfred Marshall. This approach studies how a single market behaves without necessarily considering the entire economy. The concept of partial equilibrium was developed by a famous economist known as Alfred Marshall. So because of this, it can also be referred to as the Marshallian approach to equilibrium. The idea of partial equilibrium is simple. Instead of analyzing the whole market, we focus on only one market and we assume that other markets do not affect the market that is being studied. So you can say that in partial equilibrium, we only focus on a single market or a one market. So now in this partial equilibrium, we study the effect of changes, which this change can be a change in price or a change in policy. We study the effect this change had in one market and we assume that the factors does not affect other market, so thereby we only focus on a single market. To analyze this, we use the supply curve and the demand curve, which helps us to determine the price and quantity in that single market. We also make use of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. The consumer surplus is simply the extra benefit that a buyer gets when he or she pays less than what he actually wants to pay. Let's take for instance, you budgeted 200 naira to buy a can of Zobo, and on getting to the canteen, the Zobo is being sold for 150. Now, when you subtract 150 from 200, the difference is 50 naira. So this difference is the extra benefits which the buyer gets. So simply put, that consumer surplus is the extra benefit that the buyer gets when he pays less than what he or she expected. Then the producer surplus, this is the extra benefit that the sellers get when they sell higher than the lower price they wanted to sell. Let's take for instance, they budgeted to sell the bread for 50 naira, and on getting to the market price is 100 naira. Now the extra 50 naira, which is the difference between the market price and the low price that they wanted to sell, is the producer surplus. So consumer surplus is benefit to the buyer, whereas producer surplus is benefit to the producers. This consumer surplus and producer surplus helps us to actually know how both the producer and the buyer benefits while participating in the market. Now moving further, we'll be looking at the key assumptions of partial equilibrium. The first assumption is, number one, we ignore what happens in other markets. Partial equilibrium, we disregard what happens in the other market. We only focus on that single market or one market that we are studying. The second assumption is one market assumption. We only assume that only one market or commodity is being analyzed at a time. Like I said earlier, the idea of partial equilibrium is, instead of focusing on the whole market or the whole economy, it now tends to analyze one market at a time. So we focus on only one market. So the assumption is, we assume that it is only one market that is being analyzed or being studied. So you can simply put that in partial equilibrium, we only look at a single market. The third assumption is ceteris paribus, which means that other things are constant. Ceteris paribus simply means that all other things are equal. So it means that the market remains unchanged. The other factors in other market does not affect the only market that is being studied. So other things remain constant, they remain unchanged. Now, we'll be looking at how to solve questions on this partial equilibrium. Alright, so now we'll be determining the equilibrium price and quantity using our linear equation. And here we already given a question. Let's see what our question is. Assume the demand and supply function of a commodity are given as, here is our demand function, which is 12 plus 3p, and our supply function, which is 6p minus 3. And we are asked to calculate the equilibrium price and quantity. Before we forge ahead to calculate the equilibrium price and quantity, which I believe we all know what equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity is. In case you are confused, you can search out for the previous video where we buttress the meaning of equilibrium, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and how to represent it graphically. It will help you to flow very well in this calculation. Now, looking at our question, this is a partial equilibrium question. Look at the question. It says the supply and demand function of a commodity. So remember, partial equilibrium deals with one market or a commodity. Instead of analyzing the whole economy, we look at a particular one, that is a single market. Mainly looking at this question, we have one demand function and one supply function. So obviously, we are going to have one equilibrium price and one equilibrium quantity, which simply makes it a single good market, or you can call it a one good market, which shows that it is a partial equilibrium question. So we are expected to have one equilibrium price and one equilibrium quantity as our answer. Now, let's get into the solving part. Our solution is the first step. If you can recall when we talked about the concept of equilibrium, we said that equilibrium is the point where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. So you set your quantity demanded to be equal to quantity supplied. So step 1, at equilibrium, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So when we set it, we have 12 plus 3p equals 6p minus 3. Now, we have set our quantity demanded to be equal to our quantity supplied. The next step is to collect like term. That is, we have to move our constant to one side of the equation and move our unknown. Our unknown are those numbers that have the letter p attached to it, which we are trying to solve for the values of that p. So our step 2 is to collect like terms. So collecting like terms, the constants will make our constant to be at our left hand side and our unknown to be at our right hand side. So we'll have 12, which is already at our left hand side. Then moving this constant that is at the right hand side over to this left hand side, it is negative 3. So crossing over here, due to the presence of this equality sign, it will alter this sign. So this sign will change from negative 3 to positive 3. So we have 12 plus 3 equals. Now, remember that our unknown is staying at the right hand side. So this is already staying at the main position. So you bring it down. Now, moving this over to the other side. Remember, it has a positive sign attached to it. So moving it here, due to the presence of this equality sign, it will have to change to negative 3p. So looking at what we have here, you simplify. 12 plus 3 will give us 15 equals 6p minus 3p will give us 3p. Now we have gotten to this junction. Remember, we are looking for our equilibrium price. And now there is a number attached to our p, which is 3. So for our p, which is the equilibrium price, to stand alone, we have to divide both sides by the coefficient of p, which is 3. So our step 3 is to divide both sides by 3. So we have step 3, divide both sides by 3. So you have 15 divided by 3 equals 3p divided by 3. Solving further, 3 divide itself gives us 1, and 3 into 15 gives us 5. 3 into itself gives us 1, 3 into itself gives us 1. Dividing through, you will see that we have 5 at the left hand side and our p at the right hand side. So we'll have our answer as 5 equals P, which is still the same thing as P is equal to 5. Therefore, our equilibrium price is 5. So let's assume the currency we are working with is Naira. So our equilibrium price is 5 Naira. Now that we have gotten our equilibrium price, remember the question says determine the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. To get our equilibrium quantity, you simply substitute, that is, put in the value of P, which is 5 naira, in either our quantity demanded equation or our quantity supply equation. This is what I mean. If you decide to work with this, that is the quantity demanded function, your answer should be the same when you decide to work with this. Now, when you want to substitute, what it simply means is, in this equation, which is the demand equation, wherever you see P, you replace it with the value, which is 5. And that simply gives us our equilibrium quantity. The reason why the answer you get when you work with the demand equation will be the same as the answer you get when you work with the supply equation is because at equilibrium, the quantity supply is the same with the quantity demanded. So whether you decide to solve with this equation or with this equation, your answer will be the same. Let's solve first using the demand equation so that you will get what I mean. Now, solving for equilibrium quantity, now let's use our quantity demand equation first. So using quantity demand, we'll have to solve, you substitute P equals 5 into QD, which is our quantity demand equation. So you have 12 plus 3P. Substituting for that, we'll have 12 plus 3 times 5. Now, simplifying this, we'll have substituting for that, we'll have 12 plus 3 times 5. Remember, in board math, we do brackets of division, multiplication, and addition. Looking at this, we have brackets, we have addition. So you first solve for the brackets before you add. So you have 12 plus 3 multiplied by 5. This bracket simply means multiplication. So it means what is outside the bracket should multiply what is inside the bracket. So 3 times 5 gives us 15. 12 plus 15 gives us 27. Which means that our equilibrium quantity is 27, can be 27 units. Let's use our supply equation to know if our answer will actually be the same when we use our demand equation. Now, using our supply equation is given as 6P minus 3. So remember this is an alternative. Using supply, we'll have to substitute P equals 5 into the supply equation, and our supply equation is given as 6P minus. Repeat the same process, which is anywhere we see P, we replace it with 5. 6 into 5 minus 3. Remember, we solve the brackets first. So simplifying the brackets, we have 6 multiplied by 5 gives us 30, and 30 minus 3, which gives us 27. Which means that our equilibrium quantity is 27. Now, you can see that our equilibrium quantity, when we solved using the demand equation, gave us 27. And when we solved using the quantity supply equation, gave us 27. This simply proves the fact that at equilibrium, quantity demanded equals quantity supply. In a scenario where you solved using the quantity demand equation and the supply equation and the answers are not the same, that means there is an error because both are meant to be the same. And this brings us to the end of today's lesson. One key takeaway is that at equilibrium, quantity demand equals quantity supply.